So we're now in the webinar, and I want to welcome all of you who are joining us for the second edition of City Talk. It's great to thank you all for logging on. I expect there will be more people joining us shortly. Um, and I'll wait just a moment to let people log on, and then I'll introduce our guest today. All right, let's begin. Um, I'm Rick Cole. I represent Council District Number 2 on the Pasadena City Council. Been on for just over a year. And we've had since the beginning, in fact, since before I actually took office, we've had monthly issue forums on the third Tuesday of the month. And that tradition has drawn a pretty steady audience to talking about local issues. But I thought it was important because Pasadena is such an extraordinary world-class community to spend a little bit more time talking with people outside of our community to talk about commonalities between things that are happening across our country, across our state, across our nation, across our region. And so this is the second City Talk, which is now on the first Tuesday of the month. So issue forum on the third Tuesday, City Talk on the first Tuesday. And I'm delighted to welcome to this second edition of City Talk my longtime friend and someone who I've admired his work for literally decades, Tony Perez. Tony is the senior associate at Optikos Design. Optikos Design is a very well-known and respected Bay Area architecture and urban design firm. Optikos is particularly known for creating the whole idea of recovering missing middle housing. Later on in our webinar, we'll talk about what missing middle housing is and how it applies to Pasadena. So we'll be talking today about a wide range of topics, but the theme is the connection between the built environment, between how we build our cities, how we plan our cities, and the environment. This is April, this is Earth Month. Earth Day has been celebrated in America since April of 1970. So that's 55 years. And so April, throughout this month, we're going to focus on the environment. We've been posting to social media daily. Our theme at our issue forum on the third Tuesday of the month will be on the environment. We got some great speakers. I'll talk about them at the end. But let's just jump into it. Let me frame this for you, Tony. Talk to me about your longtime practice and how that has intersected with environmental consciousness over the decades.
Yeah, thank you, Rick. Thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting Optikos Design to this forum. We really very much appreciate sharing our ideas and experiences with you. I think that the way that I've seen the environment connected over the course of my career. Now I started working as a city planner in South El Monte out of college in 1986. And so been at it a little while. I worked in the public sector until 2000 and have been in the private sector since. And so in the public sector, obviously the environmental impact reports, CEQA, all of that, but I didn't really see it having an effect. But I think that in the last 15, 20 years, I've seen the building codes really having an effect through Title 24, other measures, green building measures, where it's really becoming integral in how architects design buildings and how engineers design
Let's
sites.
pause on that for folks who are not in the business. Let's talk about Title 24 of the California Building Code.
Yeah, I'm not an expert in that. I'm just referring to it as an energy code and building code, uh, compelling applicants and architects to use certain materials to design in certain ways to avoid doing uh, certain material, avoid using certain materials or certain configurations that are not friendly to the environment, friendly to drainage, friendly to the atmosphere for that matter.
My ADU, which I'm broadcasting from this evening, is 2.5 years old. And so we came under Title 24 when I went through the city's entitlement process. So the insulation in the walls and in the attic, the windows and their, I think it's called R rating,
Yeah,
and their double paned windows. Um, we actually draw solar from the front house, the historic 100-year-old bungalow, that also has batteries. So the total electric bill last year was $700. That's not $700 a month. That's $700 for the whole year.
yeah,
And I don't have any gas. I have an induction stove, and I have three heat pumps. Work beautifully to both heat and cool the home. But of course, it's not as expensive or as extensive to heat and cool a home that is so well insulated. So that's one dimension. That's kind of the green building, the materials and the level of insulation, very different from the old house, which was built solidly, but over 100 years has settled, and there's a lot of cracks and what have you. So that's a different challenge to retrofit older homes, a big challenge in Pasadena. But that's just one dimension we're going to talk about the connection between the built environment and the environment. So continue with your story as you went into the private sector.
yeah. So in the private sector, we've gotten to see a lot of different um, uh, initiatives and projects. And so I work at usually the neighborhood scale or the city scale in writing either policy or regulation. And when we write regulations, I write zoning standards. And I've seen a lot across the country, and even in places where, well, Juliana, hi, Juliana, very good to see you tonight. Um, by the way, just a quick
Chair of
run.
our design commission and a District 2 resident and an absolutely incalculable contributor as a planning commissioner and as a design commissioner in Pasadena.
Yeah, yeah, I've gotten to know Juliana a little bit over the years. She got me in to teach at Cal Poly Pomona, where I actually went to school here in Southern California, and I taught for there for several years when she was the assistant dean. So hello to you, Juliana. Yeah, and just seeing, in places where you wouldn't expect environmental advancements, at the site level, not just at the building level, but better site design, in poor states, it's happening. And I would say it's you really see it the last 10, 15 years really ramping up, really being more common than it was obviously 20, 25 years ago. And so you see places where you just wouldn't expect what the kinds of things that California does, actually taking them on and executing them and making better individual projects. But the test, the real test that stymies a lot of jurisdictions is weaving it together into be neighborhoods or centers or a corridor. A lot of people can execute a project, but executing it to make something bigger than that it's a better environmental contribution, right?
We'll talk more about that. In fact, I think the bulk of our discussion will be at that larger neighborhood and community scale. But before we leave individual buildings, um, the the green building lead standards caught on, and they certainly have improved the energy efficiency and the water efficiency and the resource use of new buildings. But here in Pasadena, I think we're increasingly conscious that the most energy efficient building, the most environmentally conscious building is adaptive reuse. Instead of tearing down a building and then building a LEED platinum building to replace it, it's retrofitting for use and for resource efficiency older buildings. And we've seen a lot of that in Pasadena. We're not yet seeing it as much on conversions to housing. We've seen a funeral parlor become a restaurant. We've seen an old armory become a restaurant. We've seen one project in on Los Robles, converted from a solely office building to part office and part residential, but it's still an uphill battle. Um, what's the role of adaptive reuse in environmental consciousness?
Oh, it's huge, as you mentioned. Reusing something, especially an old building that is still contributing both functionally with space that people can reuse and use again, as well as the image of the community contributing well to the neighborhood and people feeling good about that building being there. I think often that part, which is not the environmental quote unquote, is often how people see the benefit more often. I don't think they perceive it as being reused as much as, oh, it didn't go away. It's still contributing to my neighborhood. It feels so good. I like my neighborhood because of, that building or that other one around the corner. Pasadena is famous for that. I think that's one of the
I
things
think
that,
that was the narrative around our library. I think that most people were thinking, well, I love this historic building. I have fond memories of this historic building. This historic building plays an important role in our civic center. I'm not sure how many people factored in the environmental benefits of not starting over again. We could have built a cheaper building, and it would have been perfectly usable as a library, but we would have lost all of that embodied energy that went into it in the first place.
right.
And then we would have to create wherever all of those materials came from. So another piece, I was involved when I was city manager of Santa Monica in something called the Living Building Challenge, which is even beyond LEED. Most people who know anything about green building know about LEED standards. There's LEED bronze, LEED silver, LEED gold, LEED platinum. The Living Building Challenge is even higher than that because it involves for new buildings as well as for adaptive reuse that you produce all your energy on site. You don't import any energy from the grid. So that means solar and batteries. You don't import any water, which is really difficult in Mediterranean and desert climates like we have in Southern California, to only get 12 or 14 inches a year in a decent year. Sometimes we get more, but sometimes we also get less. But it means compostable toilets and things like that. So you're not flushing 2 or 3 gallons every time someone uses the restroom. And then composting all of the trash on site. That's a very high standard. And we were able to do the first public building in the United States that met that living building challenge. And there was a lot of controversy about the expense, but we actually ran the numbers. Within 20 years, we were making money because we weren't going to have an electric bill and we were going to have a water bill and we were going to have a very low, if any, trash bill. And so, we expect that building being part of the city will be around for a lot more than 20 years. So in the long run, it's actually more economical. And I think that that balance between the sentimental value of keeping a building, which you referenced, the economic value of doing that, and the environmental, when all three of those are combined, adaptive reuse really has a lot of advantages.
Yeah, and it also it speaks to the future of your city in terms of changing scale or keeping scale. For example,
Mm,
some
mm,
might say,
mm.
Rick, I'd love to keep that one-story, auto repair building and turn it into a restaurant, but the value of the land has increased such that I need to build a seven-story building to make it work. And so those kinds of things are often um, competing with adaptive reuse, but then leadership cities like Pasadena find a way to keep that building as a part of the project, as opposed to yes or no or all or nothing.
Mhm. So let's shift now to the neighborhood and the community level. And they say that buildings, particularly energy and the resources that go into pumping water from the Sierras down to our toilets and drinking fountains inside buildings, that buildings, residential, commercial, and institutional, generate about 40% of greenhouse gas emissions. But the other huge contributor, especially in California, is transportation. So, what's the relationship between how we build our communities and our neighborhoods and the greenhouse gas emissions that come from the way we build?
Yeah, great question. So I would say, let me start with some good news about where the practice is right now. The practice of urban design, city planning, and architecture all combined in the 26 years that I've been in the private sector. I've seen it. You talk about this, the 20-80-20. People laugh at you, they question you, and then next thing you know, they're down to the fine details of, well, how do you do that? And so that's what's happened. It's really great news that so many places are starting to see the benefit of building walkable places, which when we started talking about them in the early 90s, I remember I got to set up chairs at CNU2 when Stefanos and Liz were hosting it here for Congress of New Urbanism in downtown Los Angeles. And I sat there in the back of the room thinking, wow, these people are talking about a lot of things that I didn't even know I was thinking about, but I'm experiencing them in my job. And this really resonating. And from that day in 1992, listening to them talk about it, I thought, wow, I really want to redirect my career to go in this direction and support that. And the term walkable environment, walkable place, wasn't yet that concise. It was a lot of different things, as you know. And so over the past, I would say, probably 10, 15 years, that term walkable place, walkable neighborhood, walkable center, as distinct from auto-dependent, auto-oriented, has really taken hold. And places, I mean, I'm working right now in Greenwood, Indiana. It's it's the equivalent of, well, it's a 75,000 population, just, probably, the typical place that has an old main street and then a bunch of suburbs. And they don't
Hmm.
know, they're not sure about how they want to build the rest of the suburbs. So we're helping them with that to try and build
Hmm.
walkable neighborhoods.
Hmm.
And so if it can happen in the middle of the country like that, in a regular community, you can be sure that it's happening in places that already value their way of life and are trying to make more of that. So for example, just north of that, north of Indianapolis, in a place called Carmel, as opposed to Carmel, that the place with all the roundabouts, that community is saying we are at a balance, like a tipping point. We can either go all auto oriented, or we can make more of these walkable neighborhoods that really define what we're about. And so you're seeing more communities uh, making a choice to include them, as opposed to like in the early days when we were talking about this, it seemed I think for a lot of good reasons, the messaging was, well, you have to do it this way. There's no other way. And we lost a lot of people in that conversation. Now, I think with time and also the reality of how hard it is, to your earlier point, to retrofit individual buildings, let alone individual neighborhoods, we've drawn a line in the sand and said, well, let's at least have a détente on this. If you want to build an auto-dependent place, there are rules and tools for that. But let's not confuse the rules and tools necessary to build walkable places because they're different. And let's not, diminish the tools for walkable places in doing so, because in the early days of doing form-based codes and other kinds of tools to deliver those places, that's what was happening. And we were being asked to make that tool do two things at the same time. And the biggest advancement was to say, no, they're two different places. They need two different sets of tools, policies, everything else.
At the larger level, I mean, a lot of people are delighted to go on vacation, and whether it's to a resort or it's to an older Latin American, European, Asian city, and they love the experience of either getting off the cruise ship or flying to Paris or Barcelona and experiencing a walkable community, walkable city, occasionally getting on the metro, zipping on a bullet train in Japan. But it's been viewed as, well, but that's there. Excuse me. And that's something that you do on vacation. It's not something that's practical in America, other than maybe go on the Freedom Trail in Boston. but you can't bring that home. You can bring home cappuccino, you can bring home ciabatta, you can bring home Thai food, but you can't bring home walkable communities. And that's changing, is what you're saying. The
Yes.
backdrop behind you, if you could share with folks what that is, that's a radical um, commitment to walkability that when it was first on the drawing board, got a lot of national attention because it was viewed as so out of step, both for its location and for its design. So, could you share what that backdrop behind you, which, by the way, is no longer just an illustration, is now actually what, two-thirds, three-quarters built?
Yeah, I would say close to two-thirds, probably a little over. Yeah, so something
Hmm.
like that. Yeah, so this is a community in Tempe, Arizona, about 2.5 miles south of downtown Phoenix on the light rail station line. And it's literally across the street from the station. So,
Mm,
yeah, and the station's in the middle of the road, and this thing is right just next to it. So the whole point was the developer, who was actually a bunch of Silicon Valley people who got out of that and said, we want to go build communities. We want to go do
mm,
something
mm,
else. So they got out of that and took their winnings and said, we want to build car-free communities. And so the name of the developer, not the name of the project, we refer to it this way, but the name of the developer is super interesting, cul-de-sac, end of the road. And
mm,
the whole point
mm,
of choosing that was to say, we see the end of the road for car-dependent environments. Yeah, they're still out there. Maybe in my lifetime, I'm not going to see the change, but they say the end is going to come for that. And so they hired our firm, Dan Perolik in particular, to lead our team to design a car-free community. And this is, just to be
Do you have a
clear,
sense of the scale, Tony?
yeah, I think I can actually, let me see if I can share something real fast here. Um, yeah, so let me just share my screen. Before I share my screen, I just want to say, because everybody get distracted with the pictures, I want to say this is not a place where you go and park your car in a garage and then get out and walk around. This is a place where you don't need a car. There
Mm,
aren't parking
mm,
spaces. The only parking
mm,
spaces that are there are for delivery vehicles, or when people move, they have furniture and they have to have a place for the truck. Otherwise, there's no parking. I've been there and walked around it, and I can tell you there's no parking.
mm.
So let me share here. So let me take that out of there. So this
So
is,
that's not a rendering, that's the real thing.
yeah, this is the real thing. Yeah. So these are pictures on our website. There's a lot of Latin American influence in the design. So here's a picture of one of the courtyards, and it's a series of courtyards that are designed to form internal spaces like this and really cool passageways. In fact, there was somebody online recently saying, when they walked through it, they felt like they were in Greece because of the narrow passageways. And the reason the passageways are narrow is that, and there's a little commercial center, but the reason the passageways are narrow, you can see here, walking through here, here's a courtyard.
Hmm.
Everything is put together closely because it's 114, 115 degrees out
Mm,
there.
mm,
The buildings create shade because you can't count on trees the same way you can in other parts of the country.
hmm,
Not a
hmm,
lot wants to grow there, and what grows
hmm.
there, is
You're not
often.
going to have a live oak
Yeah,
canopy.
exactly. Yeah. And so here's a bigger view of it. So the part that I visited when I was there in October of last year, sorry that's doing that, is right up here. So the station is right up here,
Hmm.
across right here on Apache. And there's a little main street here. And this is all walkable. They made this big enough for the fire truck to actually go down, but there are no
Hmm.
cars driving around in here. None. This
Hmm.
is all
Hmm.
walkable. And you can start to see the pattern, right? This Paseo, you can walk publicly through here, but then when you get into here, there's a little gate that you live there and you have a pass key and you get into your unit.
Hmm.
The other really cool thing, back to one of your original points, there's some of the original commercial buildings, and then you can start to see the housing back there.
Hmm.
Um, The one of the cool things about it is that because the units are so let me go back to this, because they're what we call single aspect, so they're not back-to-back units. There are no hallways, there are no corridors. Your unit has windows on two sides, and if it's a corner unit, it has windows on three sides. So passive
Hmm.
ventilation. And this is something that Dan really, really stressed with the developer. He said, you're in the middle of the desert. You can't count on cooling the same way you can somewhere else. You really need to set these buildings up to open the windows and have it really be effective, as opposed to people open the windows and say, man, I'm going to turn on the AC. So
Hmm. Hmm.
these buildings were designed from the outset to be like that.
This really evokes for me Christopher Alexander and the timeless ways of building. This feels like the lessons learned in desert climates all over the world, North Africa, in the Native
Yeah,
American pueblos, um, all through Latin America,
right.
in hot environments, in places in Spain. How much um, did you draw upon traditional methods of building in creating a modern community?
They tried to go with the local methods about, rammed earth and things like that. But that proved to be, it would be great to talk to Dan sometime about his direct experiences with that. But my understanding is that it just wasn't scalable for this type of project. However, the really interesting, one of the interesting things about, keeping to this, because nobody had ever done anything like this, absent cars. You can see here's the visitor parking for the deliveries, etc. But the thing about this is that you can see that. Let's see if I can draw on here. Oh, it doesn't look like I can. But if you look anywhere in here, the pattern is very irregular, and it's irregular on purpose, and that drove the contractors nuts because they need repetition, right? So
Mm,
the
mm,
design team had to figure out, okay, how much of this can we make random that still fits in a repeatable pattern? Like the pattern is repeatable, but it has randomness in it, and so
mm,
that contributes to the uniqueness of it, so that
mhm,
people
mhm,
don't feel like, oh, I'm in pod 12, which is just like pod 4, right?
mhm, mhm,
So
mhm.
there was that, and then there was also just the necessary height and closeness of each of the buildings that Dan really had to work with them and say, you really want to do this, because as soon as you separate the buildings to make it easy for the trades, that's a short-term thing. The long-term thing is it's going to be hotter than heck in those courtyards. So
Two two questions, Tony. One is, um, how is it performing in terms of energy and greenhouse gases? Is this really a significant improvement over the way we normally build, even at high density?
yeah, my understanding is that they've measured the temperature there in the courtyards, and it's ridiculously low. Let's say that it's
Mhm.
114 out on the Apache Boulevard, and
Mhm.
it's 84 or 79 in the courtyards. It's very, very different. It's 25, 30 degrees
Which
because
obviously makes it easier to heat the inside of the building.
that's right. That's right. So that's working. It's still, it's I don't think it's 2 years old. So there's still data to be collected, obviously, but the idea is working and it's super popular. People love it.
So in a metropolitan area, there's obviously half of 1% or 1% or maybe 10% that will make the commitment to a carless environment if they're next to a train station and if they're in a community that's pleasant to walk around and if they can meet their daily needs of going to the grocery store and the laundromat and what have you, or not the laundromat, the dry cleaners, within walking distance. But how scalable do you think this is?
The developer, they are looking at other sites across the country. In fact, this was the initial smallest version that they were
Hmm.
going to do. Yeah, they're very serious about scaling this up. And my understanding is that the next one or next two that they're working on, this would just be a phase, this
And
entire project.
And so who lives here? What kind of folks? Is there anything distinct of people who choose not to have a car?
It's all over the map.
Hmm.
Yeah, I don't have the statistics with me, but from when I visited and just observed and talked to people, I was there for a while.
Hmm.
Uh, and just the anecdotes that I've heard people come back with, it's everyone. It's people like me, empty nesters. You know, my
Hmm.
daughter
Hmm.
got married 2 years ago and she's out of the house and we're empty nesters. Young people who say, I work in downtown Phoenix, or, somewhere on the train line, and I'm going to try this.
Hmm.
Yeah, and then I don't know about families with three-bedroom units. I don't know how many of them there are, honestly.
Hmm. Although, what a safe environment for kids.
Oh yeah,
Um,
totally.
I didn't see the kind of park and playground, soccer field kind of thing that you'd expect in the suburb, although typically those things are things you have to drive to. And
Yeah.
your kids are at the mercy of when mom and dad or older sister or brother can take you to the park or the playground, even if it's close, even if it's within walking distance, it's either too hot in a community like Phoenix or too dangerous with cars and big wide highways and what have you. This would seem like a wonderfully safe place to raise kids, including the social fabric of these courtyards where I assume that neighbors get to know each other pretty well.
Oh yeah, you're walking in spaces that it's interesting. We haven't done this comparison, but man, I'm looking for some pictures here that I didn't queue up, but uh, the passages that I was showing in the plan view, they're intimate, but not to the point where you feel like you're walking in a hallway in somebody's house. But
Hmm.
it's like
Hmm.
one of those Greek or Italian streets that's just
Hmm.
10 feet wide, 12 feet wide. It
Hmm.
feels great. And there are doors all opening on it, windows on it,
Hmm.
all the things that
Hmm.
you're talking about with Christopher Alexander. All that is there. And again, those are things that none of the construction trades people that were used to working on apartments of multifamily, because it's all rental. Nobody was used to doing it this way. They said the questioned it all away, except for the developer. The developer hung in there and said, no, we're going to do this. So,
So, Tony, we've talked about three layers. We've talked about the energy and resource efficiency of individual buildings, small scale like an ADU or even skyscrapers, and making them less dependent upon consuming energy and being more self-sufficient, or because either the energy need is reduced or it's produced from renewable sources. So there's the individual buildings. Then we talked about adaptive reuse, which is not tearing down old buildings, but adapting and reusing them for new uses, expanded uses, for the sentimental reasons, the historic sense of place, the social connections, but also the energy efficiency of not having to cart all that material off to the landfill and then creating a whole new set of building materials and all the energy that goes into construction. And now we've talked about a from scratch modern energy and resource efficient and walkable community. Let's spend the second half of our hour together talking about Pasadena and how these lessons apply to Pasadena, because all three of these layers layer onto Pasadena. We have older buildings, some of whom, neither need to be torn down or better yet, adaptively reused. We have some areas where new construction can fit in on, a one-story auto, repair shop or something, or a vacant lot, a parking lot, what have you. But then also we have, adaptively reusing the historic fabric, and all that is happening now, and it's uncomfortable. We're now seeing a resurgence of the kind of angst that we had cresting when I was on the council before in the early 90s, which led to a whole series of reforms at the time. I feel like we're on the cusp of both of change, which has positive and negative environmental impacts and positive and negative um, reactions from the community. And so I'd like to talk about that. Let me talk first about something where it's more akin to Sivano in Tempe, and that is the 710 corridor. an environmental social catastrophe. Um, Caltrans back in the late 70s, early 80s wanted to punch through the 710 freeway from its terminus by Cal State LA and Alhambra all the way to the 210 134 interchange when the 210 was built in Pasadena. And they envisioned that the 710 would be finished by going that last 5 or 6 miles. City of South Pasadena first, and then later Pasadena and La Cañada united to fight that off successfully for 60 years. But what Caltrans did in order to bludgeon these cities into submission was they just dumped all of the freeway traffic from the interchange into the residential neighborhoods. You're familiar with that in southern Pasadena. And they did it deliberately and they did it maliciously and they did it brutally. They just moved everybody that was in the way out of the way, the businesses and the residents. The scars are still unhealed for many of those families that lost their homes and their businesses and their generational opportunities for wealth. Now, because that freeway is dead, that stub is still there and it's still spewing traffic into our residential neighborhoods. But Caltrans has given it back to the city, and we now face the challenge of what do we do with this monstrosity? Um, you followed a little bit of the discussions so far. Um, is this a potential to have car-free, walkable neighborhoods in Pasadena?
Yeah, I think first of all, I think the planning that I've seen on your website, the city's website, about what could happen there, what is envisioned, is it's all good news. It's all going in the right direction for sure. The because that could be misused, right? It's a once in a lifetime opportunity, once in five lifetime
Mm,
opportunity,
mm.
right? And
It's
so
certainly the biggest opportunity we'll have in our generation.
yeah, yeah. And so I think that uh, to put it in context, I just looked back at the numbers. I didn't say this when I was talking about the project on the screen behind me. That project in Arizona, it looks huge, right? It is sizable. It's 636 units. It's on 16 acres. It's a
Well,
shopping center. That's a
mhm.
shopping center site, right? A supermarket site. And
That's
so,
almost analogous, Tony. It's a little less than 50 acres usable that we have inherited back from Caltrans, and the task force that's been working on this for the last couple of years has recommended about 1,800 units. So 16 times three is
yeah,
basically 50 units, and
right.
it would be that seems like that scale of development doesn't have to be all homogeneous, right? Doesn't have to all be at the same scale, although
Right.
you point out that for just the whole question of scalability, but you could have three distinct neighborhoods with different densities and different patterns within that stub.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's where Pasadena as a leadership city really has an opportunity to demonstrate that because a lot of cities would take that and say the development pressure is for seven-story buildings. It's most efficient, and we're just going to populate the whole thing with that. But I just don't see Pasadena doing that. I see Pasadena doing house scale buildings that connect to the neighborhoods that exist to the sides of that stub, as well as big buildings as you've envisioned in I've seen some of the planning documents online. But it's a combination, and I think it would be it wouldn't come off as well as if it didn't represent the spectrum. And I think that's one of the things that people love about Pasadena is, that's what they love about Santa Barbara, right? You can walk around and feel that you can relate to the front door of almost everything you walk past. And I think that that's something to keep in mind for.
And it can help knit together Old Pasadena and some of our most
Right.
majestic historic neighborhoods, which now there's a giant ditch that divides them, and so you can't walk to Old Pasadena from a place that's really within walking distance.
Yeah, often, we see cities really stumble around with shouldn't say stumble, they struggle with trying to build transitions, and they build them in the building itself. And sometimes that's the right level, but often it's at the site level. And so you have big buildings transitioning to smaller buildings that then transition to the existing buildings. Instead of trying to do it on the building, which is hard to make work for everyone, you do it through buildings themselves. And I think that's that's one of the biggest things I learned working with Stephanos and Liz when I worked at Mullen Paul Zoidis back in '03, was using buildings themselves as objects of transition, as opposed to chipping away and trying to sculpt big buildings that need to be efficient. I mean, there's something to that, but it's better done through actual buildings and buildings that are scaled for their purpose. So I see that
And
happening.
we'll come to that on the scale of buildings because we're going to talk about the new style and scale of buildings that are popping up in Pasadena as we speak because of changes in state law. But before we shift to that, I want to note that the task force that has been working on this um, envisions this as Pasadena's first carbon neutral district. That they have from the beginning not only incorporated environmental justice and the healing of some of these long-time wounds that have racial implications at their heart. If you look at who was living there before, there was a pretty deliberate routing of where they put these freeway routes. But in addition to dealing with the human dimension and the historic dimension, they're looking forward to seeing this as a model of environmental sustainability right in the heart of our city.
Yeah, that's great. And one of the things that contributes to that is on the east side of that stub, you have a lot of corridors and centers in Pasadena, Western Pasadena. But then toward the west, and something that you probably want is to include new centers, and they might be neighborhood scale, much smaller intensity than what you have on the east side of that stub. But to make it, carbon neutral, one of the things to do is to make it walkable. And there's a spectrum of walkability, right? Like what I was showing on the screen behind me, that's going all the way and relying on transit, not relying on anything else, and walking. And maybe you can get there, maybe you can't, but on the way to that, on that spectrum, uh, including, as I like to say, something, amenities. We use these euphemisms of centers and main streets and everything, and I've started to call them amenities and say, a low intensity neighborhood can have amenities like this that you can walk to. That's how they used to do it, right? 150 years ago. I mean, your city's full of this as an example.
Yeah, our neighborhood has missing middle housing. We'll touch
Yeah.
on that in a minute. We have some very limited commercial buildings, some of whom are occupied by commercial uses, most of which are not within our residential neighborhood. They've been converted to housing over the years. And then we also have amenities like McDonald Park, which is, of course, just an absolutely jewel of this neighborhood here in historic Bungalow Heaven. Um, so let's talk about one of the most serious challenges. 40% of greenhouse gas emissions come from our transportation sector. The vast majority of that is cars. It also includes trucks and airplanes. But while those are heavy polluters, there's not as many of them as there are the millions of cars in Southern California. And even though pollution has been reduced, there's still the vast majority of them are burning gas. So that creates tremendous greenhouse gas emissions. So the idea that's promoted both to create more affordable housing and to bring housing closer to where people work, which means less travel between where you live and where you work, which means less vehicle miles traveled, which means less greenhouse gas emissions. All these things seem to make sense on paper that we should build in more intensity near the transit investments we've made, near where the jobs are, not continue to build out on sensitive habitat or next to fire vulnerable areas, on the periphery that again require these huge freeways to get people back and forth and condemn those folks to hours and hours of soulless commuting. So all this seems to make sense on paper, that we have greater intensity in a community like Pasadena. Where the rub is, and I'm seeing it both in large scale and then at the neighborhood scale, is what's actually being built in the sense of that vision are 6 and 7 story buildings with surface parking on a so-called podium where it's cheaper than going down. And so the ground floor is often really barren and doesn't have doors and windows because behind it you've got parked cars. Then you've got 5, 6 stories of massive building and often taking up a half a block, 2/3 of a block, an entire square block. And as you might suspect, for a couple reasons, those are pretty unpopular. One reason is people feel like it doesn't fit into Pasadena in its design. It feels like it's sort of plopped in from Mars. And second, people both, I think, realistically and also, certain perception is that, oh, all these people, all these cars, all this congestion, it's going to negatively affect my environmental quality of life. So this is something that's happening all over the state. And you are an advisor and a partner with many communities at Opticos. How are other communities reacting to this push by the state to require cities to accommodate this level, which turns out to be this type growth?
Yeah, it's a huge challenge, especially in cities that um, I would say, medium-sized cities, 100,000, 75,000, and then obviously it's smaller, it's even a bigger challenge. But what um, what we find is that uh, there's this tipping point of when a certain amount of development intensity is allowed or required by the state.
Mhm.
uh, then there are other unfortunate things that need to be dealt with that aren't being dealt with right now. For example, density bonus. So I'll give you an example. In the city of San Rafael, in Marin County, we worked on a downtown area plan, and the community said, we want to offer a local density bonus so that developers aren't attracted to the state density bonus, and maybe we can get more predictability about it because we understand
Hmm.
it's a
Hmm.
reality. And
It's a
so
different off-ramp.
yeah. And so we came up with the strategy of, okay, 5 stories is what everybody's willing to agree to, and they'll get another 1 or 2 at the most if they did the local density bonus, which on paper was more attractive than more appealing than the state density bonus.
So what does the community get out of the alternative?
Community benefits. So public open space or other things that were listed in the ordinance. And so, unfortunately, the um, the um, the developer in this one case, instead of a 7 story building with community benefits and bonus built in, ended up with a 17-story building through state density bonus because state density bonus is just math, and it also assumes it's still to this day. What is it? 40 years old, the law. I don't remember. It's pretty old, and it was built on the assumption that there are bad rules in the way, and so it needs to, do all these things. But all these cities are trying to do the right thing, as you're saying, and then trying to accommodate higher intensities, and yet there's this, sledgehammer right behind them, no matter what they do. So I would say, aside
That's a whole discussion, and we're having that in Pasadena. The mayor and I,
okay,
um, in Pasadena, Mayor Gordo and I, fundamentally agree on the need to protect the character of our community while accommodating new growth. Um, he leans toward, well, let's put on our boxy gloves and punch the city in the nose or punch the state in the nose because they really shouldn't be impinging on cities that are good actors that are producing housing. And my perspective is these laws are coming down, and we should see if we can influence them rather than by fighting.
Yeah.
See if we can collaborate with our legislators, people like our state senator and our state assembly member who seem to be sensitive to our
Yeah.
concerns. I don't know which of us is right or if either of us is right. Time will tell, but we are really united in trying to find a Pasadena way that we can accommodate more housing in our community, but do it in a way that enhances the quality of life for the people who are going to live there and enhances the life for the people who live around there for generations. So you've had a chance to hear about our objective design standards. This is something that you've introduced in many communities. I think you said 30 communities that you've worked on personally. How does our approach stack up of trying to abide by these state laws, but to shape the design? And design, as you well know, is not just an aesthetic, like I think that building is beautiful or I think that building is ugly. That's important. But design is much more than in the eye of the beholder. It's also what's happening on the ground floor. Is it bare concrete walls or cinder block walls, or is it doors and windows? Is there room for public open space that's actually usable? Does it feel like it fits into a neighborhood? And Pasadena actually has some 4 and 5 story buildings that have been around since the 1920s that are beloved
Yeah.
today.
Yeah.
But we're not beloving the 6 and 7 story buildings that are coming in. So what do you make of our objective design standards, which are the ink is barely dry on adopting them last month?
Okay. Yeah, what I've seen is a PowerPoint online. I haven't seen the standards themselves, but they looked like standards that just hadn't been, turned into a page of standards. As I mentioned, I was really impressed by them. I've been working on objective design standards for towns and bigger cities. Currently working on Carmel, objective design standards for Carmel right now and their neighborhoods. And I led the team that did them for Santa Barbara. So we worked on a lot of great places. But at the scale of Pasadena, the buildings that you're dealing with, I think you're talking about your RM 48 zone. Um,
Yeah, well, the state has forced us through our last housing element to essentially stipulate that those are at 87 units to the acre before state density bonuses kick in.
wow.
So we're talking densities north of 100 units to the acre.
Yeah. Yeah. And the way that the buildings, what the standards require of building design, I think really strikes a wonderful balance between effectiveness in what you're going to require the buildings. Like one example is the solid to void ratio. That sounds like just some architect thing that we like to do with buildings. But actually, it's been turned into a readable, effective, clear standard that when you look at it and the way that they present it, this is what it is, that you're not getting that here, and this is what it is. It's very clear why you would want a standard like that. And
It
produce,
replaces these numeric formulas, either at the state level or at the local level
yeah,
of units per acre. Who
right.
knows, looking at a building, how many units per acre that is? Nobody
Yeah,
does, except maybe a developer that's how they make their money. They can probably tell. And FAR, floor area ratio, nobody knows what, a 2.0 and a 3.0 is. But this is really about building buildings that look like buildings. In the remaining time, I want to touch on something that Opticos has really been a pioneer on, and that's so-called missing middle housing. Because between a single-family house and a 6 story apartment building or condo, we used to have a rich variety, and all across Pasadena, we have bungalow courts, we have garden apartments, we have these beautiful historic buildings like the Maryland um, uh, that were just beautiful 4 and 5 story residential buildings that date back 100 years. All of that got literally banned for 50 years. So how do we get back to missing middle housing and not have just two sizes fit all, either the single family house on a lot all by itself, or 5 and 6 and 7 story buildings?
Yeah, exactly. That this is what you're talking about. So over here are the big buildings you're talking about, and over here are the houses and everything inside here that Pasadena knows. Your neighborhoods in your district have some forms of this, and Pasadena has all of these things. I often use Pasadena as an example. You know, these buildings were part of a catalog. A lot of times they came out of the Sears catalog or other catalogs you could order from, and they just show up at the train station. The carpenter would build them, and they were designed to fit a lot, an existing lot. There wasn't all this mystery about if the building was going to be fitting the lot. They were designed at the factory to do that. And so what you're talking about, everybody knows as duplexes and fourplexes and the courtyard apartment, the beautiful examples in Pasadena of the bungalow or cottage court, as might call them, multiplexes of 2 and 3 stories, and of course townhouses. These we work all over the country in helping make these legal again and possible again. And I would say that they work in many communities, and the way that we advocate them to work is uh, to basically cluster around amenities, whether there's
Mm, mm,
existing
mm.
uh, we start as a crossroads. Let's say you have a crossroads, you're a rural town, you're at the edge of a community that could have a cluster of missing middle around it. Because the
I
idea
mean,
is that
do you see ways in which we could integrate those into um, lower density Pasadena neighborhoods? Because the our general plan 30 years ago really said, let's put the density by the train stations and let's protect our existing single family neighborhoods as they are. That's changed because of state ADU laws. So now single family neighborhoods must accommodate accessory units, rear units. Um, but people are worried about the camel's nose under the tent of a duplex or a triplex or a garden apartment. Um, and particularly their sensitivity to historic neighborhoods. We don't want to see historic fabric lost. But are there communities akin to Pasadena where graceful missing middle housing has been introduced?
so yes, I mean, if you look at this is an example of a regional set of standards we prepared for the Commerce Department in the state of Washington a couple of years ago. And they asked us to basically help them implement a state law that compels or obligates cities to allow missing middle housing by the size of their city. And so we came up with a range of places that occurred across 3 counties.
Mm,
You can
mm,
you can see these three are in every suburban community, right? And even maybe
mhm,
this fourth and fifth one. And then up here, it depends, where you are.
mhm,
Pasadena has all of these places, I think.
mhm, mhm,
And what we did is we came up with a system that basically said, depending on the environment that you're in, these are the building or the missing middle types that are recommended, and the standards are in this package to support that. And we backed it up by matching the lot sizes to the building types, which is another sort of an Achilles heel of a lot of standard writing. People don't connect the two. They write a density rule or an FAR rule, but they don't connect the reality of the lot size to the reality of the building that they want on it. So we did this for Marin County, and we did it for Puget Sound, Washington.
Reluctantly, I'm going to have to bring our very enriching discussion to a close in the next couple of minutes. I want to thank everyone who's participated. And if you enjoyed what you saw, we'll put it online and you can recommend it to other folks. I want to conclude and give you a moment for your concluding thoughts, Tony. Taking on 100 years of building in an unsustainable way, using materials that were not reusable or durable. Um, Building around the car so that when we have to go anywhere to do anything, we've got to jump in our car, and our cars have gotten very big. And now we're at war all over the world, it seems, on days like today, to safeguard our oil and other people's oil and other people's access to oil. Um, Getting to the root of a more sustainable lifestyle that we could all enjoy, that isn't about losing something. It's actually about gaining the security and the sense of place that timeless places have. Do you think we're going forwards? Do you think we're going backwards? Or do you think it's too soon to tell?
I think we're going forward, I would say across the country. In California, that's a different story. I think because
Mm,
there's so many
mm.
laws that are well intended to produce housing, it feels like the opposite. It feels like people's hands are tied, but it's actually opening doors. Like the work that I just mentioned that we did in Marin County and then later in Puget Sound, Washington, it wouldn't have happened if the state hadn't said, hey, you need to increase your housing supply. You just need to do it. By the same token, uh, I think that there are a lot of places across the country that are doing it because people are demanding choice. I think that the thing you reminded me of earlier is as Americans, we're used to choices. We love choices. We demand choices. Other countries, they don't always have that. We demand it, we expect it. And I think that what you're talking about, trying to make a community the way that you're talking about, or continue and to make Pasadena the good parts of Pasadena, the beautiful parts that everybody loves, the walkability and all that, they can change and they can improve by looking at it as choices, making more choices available to people as opposed to locking down on the choice that you have right now, that's your choice. But I would say more often than not, I run into people in cities that say we are being asked to broaden the choices for our citizenry.
Well, Tony, it's been, as always, a pleasure to dialogue with you, to learn from you, and I want to thank you for joining us. I want to remind viewers that we have every month an issue forum. This is April. This is Earth Month, and so we'll have a forum this third Tuesday of the month. Coming up, and it'll be devoted to the environmental issues. We'll have Anna Soul River, who's the District 2 representative to the Environmental Advisory Commission. She'll be talking about the built environment and particularly adaptive reuse, which is a passion of hers. We'll have Cynthia Kennedy, who has just done a fantastic job leading Pasadena 100 and spearheading the effort to put Pasadena on the road to totally renewable energy for our electric utility by 2030. We have the new sustainability coordinator and manager for the city of Pasadena, who's brand new, and she'll be talking about a whole range of environmental initiatives that the city is embarked upon. And we'll have my colleague, Councilmember Justin Jones. He wasn't on the mailer because he's up for election. And so during election time, he can't do that kind of publicity. But Justin heads up the Municipal Services Committee of our city council, and previously served on the Environmental Advisory Commission and is a strong environmentalist. So it's going to be a great forum. We're diverting from our usual time. We usually start at 7 p.m. in the Jefferson Auditorium. We're going to start at 6 p.m. across the street to enjoy a little bit of the outdoors. We're going to have some food, um, plant-based refreshments. You can try some things if you haven't tried some of the really yummy food that doesn't require killing animals, and obviously is much less harsh on the environment. Some other exhibits and things like that. It'll be a lot of fun. That's coming up on the third Tuesday. I hope to see you there, and thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you all.